ਵੈਲਕਮ ਟੂ ਮੇਨ ਸਟਰੀਟ ਔਨ ਜਸਟ ਬ੍ਰੌਡਕਾਸਟਿੰਗ। ਆਪ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਤੂਰ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ, ਨਮਸਕਾਰ, ਆਦਾਬ ਐਂਡ ਸਲਾਮ। ਨਵਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਲਿਆ ਰਹੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੋਲੀਟਿਕਸ ਮੇਨ ਚੀਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈ ਡਿਸਕਸ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਅਮਰੀਕਨ ਪੋਲੀਟਿਕਸ ਇਨ ਪਰਟੀਕੂਲਰ, ਅਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਾਲ ਨੈਚੁਰਲੀ ਹੈ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਪੋਲੀਟਿਕਸ ਐਂਡ ਸਮ ਆਫ ਦੀ ਅਦਰ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਅਫੈਕਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਦੋਜ਼ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਵਿਚ ਅਫੈਕਟ ਦਾ diaspora who have adopted this country as their own country, and they have taken the oath to protect and bear the arms for this country. And when you do that, what kind of country we inherited, where we are, and where we will go. That is going to be the main subject matter of this show. And also there's one thing which as I will go along, I will repeat and say it again, that let's not forget that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And we have to be on the table as an American first and foremost, and based on that, then we have to dissect the issues not from individual personal point of view, not based on your individual faith, but based on the Constitution of US and what it offers to individuals. Before I go further, I'm going to introduce you to the guest who is going to be with me today, and he will be coming here from time to time and discuss with me. An old friend of mine, but we also share a lot of things, but at the same time we also have our own arguments, discussions. And first let me say welcome to Charlie Zelban. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you, Harpreet.
What I was going to show and share with you, if you remember when Iran had the president Mohammad Ahmadinejad, he came to visit New York. I'm going to exactly say what happened, and I don't know if you really know or remember that or not. United Nations session was going on. He came to attend the session. We had the mayor at that time, Rudy Giuliani, famous at that time, now infamous for me, a lot of people, because of his actions and deeds. But Columbia University, the Dean of Columbia, he invited the President of Iran to come and speak at Columbia University. Mayor Giuliani at that time let him know to the Dean his displeasure and his opposition to the President of Iran coming to Columbia University, which is a great seat of education, freedom of thoughts, freedom of speech, and everything, and speak over there. The dean's answer to mayor was that you run the city. We do not advise you unless you ask for some particular advice. I run this institution, Columbia University. And if and when we will need your advice on who to invite and who not to invite, we'll let you know. But freedom of speech is supreme. He did speak over there, and questions were put on for Israel, because he was openly that Israel should not be even on the earth. You know that, I know that. And when he was introduced, the questions were put in, including that why you say whatever you say about Israel, and he did not say anything. He did not answer a single question in that speech. And at the end of the speech, it was said that, Mr. President, you did not answer the questions which were asked. That is the force and power of freedom of speech. And what is happening, or what happened during the years when we have Trump, even though the trend started before that, during the Trump and after the Trump, we are into that area where freedom of speech is being attacked from both sides, left and right. Okay? So we're going to talk about that, and before we do first question, I want your read on what I just said. What would you like to say on that, or add to it?
Well, I need a little more refreshment, but I do remember the incident, and also Giuliani was not that esteemed as a mayor. When he came in, he did adjust things, and it helped the quality of life in New York City as a whole. Although his personality quirks started coming out because he had no governor. He just went to extremes. And
that's what he
obviously always had ambitions, but he was, when 9/11, I know it's a little off topic, but when 9/11 happened, that's when his popularity increased, not back when the Iranian president was there. And people couldn't wait for Giuliani to be out.
No, I agree. I agree. Not to cut you off. Hold your thoughts. Actually, you finish, then I will say. Go ahead.
Oh, but anyway, no, I agree with you about, it's a very tough question about whether you permit somebody with abhorrent speech to be able to talk unfettered or not, because it cuts both ways. And where does it stop? Once you start it and say you can't say this, and now bring it forward to what's happening now is you have Ron DeSantis in Florida banning books. You have other, Texas, they're banning books. They're going to libraries.
We had Virginia.
Pardon?
Virginia.
Yeah.
What's his name? That new governor over there, Young.
Yeah.
Something, right? Yeah.
Youngkin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, see, the freedom of speech is very important, no doubt about it. And I also agree with you that there should be some ethics which you should stick to when you talk publicly, especially. Okay. A lot of people may not agree with me, and I don't know about you. You will find out after I pose this question. There is a professor, a tenured professor at Penn State University, a woman. Okay. Sometime during last maybe 2 years ago, or within last 2 years or so, she made some comments where she mentioned that there should be a limit on the Asians who come to United States and who go to the schools. Okay? And she questioned the intellect of the Asians as compared to the whites. She happened to be white. Now, after that, what happened was, even though she's tenured and she must have done great job till then, all of a sudden everybody is out there for her head. And I'm like, if you say that we do have freedom of speech, then she has freedom of speech. Okay? That should not be the criteria to fire her. They have already reduced her, whatever she was doing before and everything. So For me, what you're trying to do, you're trying to prove yourself as liberals, which I don't know what it means. If you know something, I would like to hear from you.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I mean, I've heard about this person. I don't know if she lost. I'm unfamiliar as to whether she lost her tenure or not.
Not yet.
Yeah. See,
It's in the process.
Tenure sounds like that's part of a contract, and she is permitted to say but that doesn't immunize her from the reactions of people to what she did say.
I agree. I agree.
Even though she is in a position where she won't jeopardize her job.
But then again, don't you think it goes down to altering the thought of the person on the freedom of speech? If the person wants to say something, if there is a sword on the head of the person, that person will not actually say whatever he thinks, or maybe he heard from someone and articulated in his or her own way to share it with the audience. What's wrong with that? It's not easy subject.
I guess it depends on the setting.
I
guess it depends on the setting. Is this person have an open mic and just can say whatever they want with no?
It was not on open mic.
No,
it
I'm
was
just saying.
Yeah.
But
hot mic, like they say. Yeah.
But I mean, just this week or last 2 weeks, there was a similar type of situation where the University of Michigan Medical School was having a white coat ceremony. Are you familiar with what happened there?
Yeah.
And they invited the keynote speaker, who is a medical doctor out of, I think, University of Maryland, and she is very much against abortion and women's right to choose.
Yeah. All the medical students walked out.
And that was their right to say that. I mean, I think the university made a bad choice. I don't know exactly what the politics were of making that choice.
Okay, you
but
say,
then you don't necessarily
then I will give you my penny.
They don't necessarily uninvite people once you've invited them.
Yeah.
So.
For me, invitation is something different than. What I admire is that instead of putting the pressure on canceling the invitation, which has happened earlier in some of the places, including one place in California, maybe more than once, that the administration decided not to cancel the invitation, but the students decided to show their freedom of speech by walking away, showing the back to the person, sending the clear message to the person that you are not welcome. Or your thoughts are not welcome. You are welcome as a person, but whatever you are thinking or whatever you are doing is not welcome. That's why even before we started the show, I was talking right in your presence that my next show, which is going to be next Tuesday, same time, I'm going to talk about Roe versus Wade. So what happens is, now if we take into consideration that freedom of speech and whatever happened, now let us take into consideration, you can say whatever you want to say, but
I was just having a thought regarding that. Is that, unfortunately, it's not in the vacuum. So the idea of freedom of speech and having these controversial speakers is promoted as a way of pushing the envelope to create other moments to show that, okay, these people are such hypocrites and are intolerable. I could be able to say whatever I want in your face, and I don't have to suffer any consequences for it. But they're doing it in a way that is intentional to do that. That it's very intentional in order to create this other moment so that they can have a viral moment. and get their supporters riled up because they were able to create the controversy.
Well, that is true. We will continue on this, and I still want to come back to January 6th before the end of the show, but let's take a small break here, and after the break we will be right back. Welcome back to Mainstream, and we are going to just continue where we left. We're talking about freedom of speech, how it affects, and everything. Whatever happened on January 6, 2021, okay, the day the Trump came down that golden stairs at Trump Tower to declare his candidacy, if we really look at that, it did not start there. He was probably planning for his run for years. And even if he was not planning, there were people behind the curtain who were looking for somebody who can achieve what they wanted to achieve. And they found Trump. And when he said in one of those moments, when he said that if I shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, I will not get arrested, people will still love me and still make me the president. You remember that, right? Mm-hmm. So January 6th actually is a culmination of that, from his declaration of to be a candidate. Okay. Now the question comes in. Today, he is in Washington, D.C. for the first time since he left on January 21st, 2021. Because, you know, that oath takes place at midnight. Mm-hmm. And while the Biden was taking oath, he,
right,
took the chopper and he left,
right,
never welcomed Biden.
Yeah, sure.
Because he's still claiming that I'm the president.
Right.
Okay. Again, that is part of the free speech, that he can claim whatever he wants to claim, even though he has not been able to prove anything. Same thing with Alex Jones when he said that Sandy Hook massacre never happened, where those kids got killed, right? Mm-hmm. Now the question comes in for me, which is he really using the freedom of speech for himself, or he's setting up some sort of, or his group of people are setting up some sort of stage for 2024?
Oh, right now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say that that's partly it. I think he's trying to maintain whatever leverage he can within the Republican Party as a shield of all the legal problems that he foresees him coming in front of. And as long as he can maintain that illusion that he is a president or a political candidate, that he feels he will be immunized from being prosecuted. And all these other cases are developing, and a lot of these things have not just started developing at the election of 2020 in November, but also they have their roots back in Bush and Gore with the recount in Florida. Mm-hmm. And how it was brought they took it out of the state courts and brought it to the Supreme Court. But also, they organized a riot, they called it the Brooks Brothers riot, to prevent the counting of ballots, because they don't want the votes to count. And if you hear one of the things Trump and and other state Republicans now is they don't want ballots to be counted. And if you heard what Steve Bannon said just prior to the election of 2020, he said, well, we know that the Democrats do more mail-in ballots and they're delay in counting them. So we will be ahead on election night, and we want to shut the countdown and declare ourselves the winner. Not to see who everybody voted, but to just be in a position to say, I won, and then let everybody disprove that I didn't win.
So that is actually, exactly that was the plan, even though it did not go exactly the way they planned it. But then the question comes in, what makes it sure that if next Republican president comes in, doesn't matter who comes in as a president, or a Democrat, if Democrats also decide to be that crazy or courageous, whatever somebody wants to call it, that if they try to do that, are not we sowing the seeds for sort of like a civil war?
Yes, unfortunately. I mean, well, there are elements of that developing right now. Now, will they turn violent? I don't know. I don't think so. Because there are other means other than what happened 160 years ago with the Civil War. But, there's similarity between the Dobbs decision of the Supreme Court now with eliminating Roe versus Wade and women's right to choose their own health plan and the right and an attack on privacy, and what happened in 1856 when the Dred Scott decision was made, which abolished the compromise for slavery and how it would be able to be established in the new states that were coming into the Union. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't, Congress can't do that. Slavery is legal everywhere, instead of being restricted. And that laid the seeds to a civil war 4 years later, especially when Lincoln came in and was elected as a Republican president with the idea of dealing with the slave issue in some fashion. The southern states said, we're just going to secede. They felt they can nullify the Constitution, and Lincoln went in and started and said, no, we have to maintain the Constitution. That was what the fight about. It evolved into the emancipation of the slaves, but and that was an issue, but it wasn't necessarily the first issue of defending the country.
Now the question comes in for me, okay, do we have that much mature people in both the parties who will really think in terms of supremacy of the Constitution, the United States as a country, and being a superpower, which it is not at the level where it was, let me say, about 20 years ago. And I don't know where it will be 20 years down the road. But the generation which is coming up now, they haven't seen any actual war. Yes, they are aware of Afghanistan, they are aware of Iraq, and they are aware of those things, but they don't have anybody who has really fought for democratic values and against the communists, and coming home and saying that I fought for democracy. Mm-hmm. Now it is more for, more about the power struggle between, a different way of Cold War between United States and Russia.
Well, there's two things here. One, the first you said, are there any mature individuals? There are in the Democratic Party. There are none, I don't think, in the Republican Party, because that's the way it's distilled itself over the last years. Because what I perceive as the intellectual firepower that the Republican Party had that created the atmosphere for Reagan and other changes that we've been living in. That happened 50 years ago, and those people don't exist anymore. And what you see now is the sediment of what's left over, and those are the people who are running the party. They're not true. Really the major firepower, but they definitely have an ardent following. And just to address the whole thing about fighting for democracy, I think the war that's going on in the Ukraine is that proxy war about democracy right now. It's not just, yes, it is a fight and a proxy battle between the U.S. and Western countries against Russia. But Ukraine is doing it.
Russia and China.
Yes, China is in the background.
We just can't ignore it because, during the Winter Olympics, okay, President Putin was planning to invade Ukraine earlier, but President Xi asked him to withhold till games are over.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what happened. Which means that even though it was assumed, especially in the United States, that Cold War is over, Cold War was never over.
No.
And now the question comes in, and you are absolutely right, that the war in Ukraine is the war about two different thoughts. Democratic, even though it is limping right now based on what happened in 2020 or during that election or before or after. Even in Wisconsin, they changed the law now for voting rights, absentee ballots and everything, which again is in the code because some handicapped people have already challenged it. Where it will end up by 2024, I don't know. But whatever it is, the so-called the democratic setup against the communist way of thoughts, the role of the rulers, whether it's a Democrat elected or a communist elected. If you really look at it, there is a trend going on that there is more like dictatorship style.
Colonial. The Russians are trying to colonize the Ukraine, and then Putin has already expressed his interest in other Baltic states, not to just stop, but he doesn't have the capacity to do it. So he's full of ambition without the means of doing it.
To achieve it.
Yeah, except utter destruction on everything. But ultimately, I don't think he will succeed.
Okay. Even if we really look at it, in India, there is a current situation is more like dictatorship. You know how in Israel, they literally destroy the homes of the fighters, Hamas, okay? The first thing is you say, okay, Harpreet is a terrorist. Nobody will look into the background of Harpreet, what he is fighting for. They will come, they will raise the house just because Harpreet was out there or did something.
Right.
Same thing is happening in India, that some Muslims, there was some things going on. They protested and they picked up the leader, the organizer, and they took his house down by claiming that it was constructed without proper permits. Exactly replication of what happened in Israel, West Bank. But we're going to talk
do I still
about...
have 1 minute to say something?
Sure.
Because in our conversations, it made me think of William Faulkner, the author, had this quote, which is, the past is never dead. It's not even in the past.
Let's take a break, and after the break, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Mainstream, and we are going to continue talking about democratic values, democratic setup, freedom of speech, and the link between what happened on January 6th, even though we do not have enough time today to dissect everything. But we are trying to at least understand some of the mindset which brought the whole thing to that January 6th setup. There is one thing about, before we go into our discussion and continue on that, there is something which I will talk about when we talk about democratic setup and democracy, right? This is how I look at it. Doesn't matter which way you dissect, still the minority rules majority. Let us assume 60% people came out to vote. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That 100 vote which got counted are only the 60%.
Which is really the 30% that.
Okay?
Yeah.
So anybody who gets 31%
Right.
is going to rule on rest of the 69%.
Right.
Okay? So I'm going to dig out while you do the answer. There was something, which somebody sent to me about, in democracy, how certain things, if you do not participate in democracy, you get ruled by, it's not inferior, but it is less intellect people who rule you than intellectual rule if you participate 100% in democracy.
Right.
I will dig that out. But going down to proxy war on Ukraine between democratic value, democracy, and communist values, Russia is already they started actually during Trump's presidency by going into Syria, providing indirectly support to Iran also, okay? And when there was Khashoggi issue, okay, even though Trump never brought it up, but there were institutions in the United States which brought it up to the front, and the future king of Saudi Arabia, who was involved in it, MBS, yeah. So when you look at that, ultimately what happened, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who was committed to uphold the values and also the people who murdered Khashoggi in the United States, ended up going to Saudi Arabia. And when the discussions took place, that actually brings up another very important issue. One of the things which he said, of course he will not admit it, you know that, I know that, this is a known fact. But he also brought up the issue of detainees in Guantanamo Bay. So how is that different than what they did when it comes down to democratic values? The people who got arrested after 9/11, they are still chained, they are still there. Mm-hmm. Their freedoms are not there still.
Right.
And even though United States still is a country of law, but the law is not being implemented on those because they were never brought on the land.
Right. In that particular situation, they didn't follow the law. Our government did not follow the law because they can't prosecute those people in our courts, so they're there. But
so that changes some of the dynamics about the standard, right?
Mm-hmm. But a couple of things just to backtrack.
While you talk, let me dig out that quote which I was talking about. Go ahead.
Okay, just to backtrack a little bit. Well, just to address Saudi Arabia, I mean, Biden had to go there because of the current situation, of trying to get the oil prices down to deal with global inflation and to deal with, our European partners.
I agree. I agree.
But also, he did get concession for permitting Israelis airlines to fly over Saudi Arabia space. I don't know what other concessions he got, but that's, there are other things that he was able to deal with, and as opposed to with Trump, I mean, all these concessions that we get from other countries are not being handed out as party favors. They're a result of negotiations. I mean, all they had to do was tell Trump, put a billboard up and say you were great, and he said, okay, what do you need? You need this? I'll give it to you.
Give it to you. No, I know. He was more like handshake transactional president. What do you give me if I give you this?
Right.
Right. Oh, the quote which I was talking about, it is written by Plato. One of the penalties for refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by inferiors.
Right.
Which is so true. Mm-hmm. Now the question comes in, for me, when I look at the current situation, I'm not saying that Democrats are really superior as compared to Republicans.
At the moment they are.
At the moment, at least, Republicans are doing everything to prove that they are inferiors when it comes down to intellectually have that model, like they say that beacon on the mountain, how to diminish that beacon, So that is what is happening here in the United States. So when we look at that, because I think we have only like few minutes left, only like 3 minutes left maybe. What I want from you before you leave, I want your thoughts about before the public hearings of the January 6th Commission, when they started going on TV live, and after. What do you see or what you felt before and what you feel now? And what do you think we can expect in next hearing or so?
Well, I personally, I was following things prior to the hearings. So what I was hoping for the hearings, and it seemed like, is the exposure of the information that was being developed, that really, unless you read people who were following the court proceedings, you wouldn't know exactly what was going on, because unfortunately the press has to print stuff that's sensational, and they weren't necessarily always getting it right, and it's easy to set people up to attack them than at times to keep people buying or clicking on things. Well, for me, I hope that it diminishes the Republican Party to show exactly what they were and how complicit they were. I mean, as much as they're talking about it, I mean, it's directing everything at Trump. There was about 196 people in the Congress, in the House, who voted not to authorize the election.
Yeah.
They're all complicit. And they're sitting there right now. And then you look at what happened after January 6th, and then President Biden came in on January 20th. And what happened? Because it was a 50-50 Senate, but with the Democrats in charge, the Republicans, they had to organize their rules, and they dragged their feet. So you have somebody like Merrick Garland not being confirmed until 2 months later than when Joe Biden got in. You have more people that Merrick Garland needed to be in place in charge of the Department of Justice. They didn't come in until 3 months later, and the guy who's running the investigation of the riot, it didn't come in until almost 6 months later. So you had all these people who had a vested interest in not getting to the truth.
Well, there is one
it
thing.
being able to drag and slow things down, and hopefully everything would go down the memory hole and nobody would remember anything because things move so fast. You say, oh, well, we forgot all about that.
Well, that is true, and we have to go. But before we go, there is one thing which I will like to say today. I don't know if you really read it or not yet. You definitely read this part, that there was a vote in the House to codify the marriage.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. One of the Republican who
From Pennsylvania.
voted against it from Pennsylvania, exactly. He attended his son's wedding today, who happens to be a gay.
Right. And
He voted against the
they
law.
welcomed their son-in-law.
And he welcomed his son-in-law, who happens to be a gay.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you talk about hypocrisy. You know, and that's why, you know, when I look at it, that's why I'm saying that I still have a hope that the whole situation can be retrieved, but you have 20 seconds.
Okay.
before
One
we wrap
last thing
up.
you mentioned about the mindset of January 6th. It didn't just develop after the election. This has been being cultivated for years.
Well, yeah, we are going to talk about that when we meet again on the show down the road, but definitely it's going to be very interesting, and stay tuned, and until next time, good night and good luck.